Hello there, greetings and welcome to On The Table. We are broadcasting on RTM Click and My TV's Berita RTM channel 123, which is also live streaming on YouTube. I'm your host, Brendan Lepore. Welcome once again, and on tonight's episode, in the next 30 minutes, we'll be outlining the key potential for Malaysia to leverage its ASEAN Chairmanship to pursue economics reforms and institutional strengthening. We welcome to the studio Sharmila Suntera Sekarun, Assistant Manager under the Economics and Business Unit at the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, or IDEAS. Thank you so much for joining us, Sharmila.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, next is going to be a big year for us, right? Of course, Malaysia being the host of the ASEAN Chairmanship. And first and foremost, let me just ask you, before we roll down to our questions, so on and so forth, touching base on the reforms and economic affairs or ideas and what's its role, what is your inspiration and aspirations for next year's Chairmanship of Malaysia?
Yeah, I think just maybe at the core of ASEAN itself, there is a sort of language where it respects sovereignty. There's also a lot of There's a lot of non-interference, which is also known as the ASEAN Way. But I think although it's been working for a while and for many years in sort of maintaining stability and security in the region, I think there is a point where that methods need to change.
Right.
And I think coming into the ASEAN Chairmanship, that is something that Malaysia can sort of put on a firm foot in terms of global, regional security issues and everything that's happening in the region as well, to sort of put on that clear, more firm position as well.
Yeah, so economics is actually one of the pillars, right? So we actually discussed this particular issue, and now we just want to go in deeper. So Malaysia's ASEAN Chairmanship next year will provide definitely a unique opportunity to shape the regional agenda and even advance important priorities. So the question is, how can Malaysia leverage its chairmanship to promote good governance? And we're also talking about transparency right here, democratic principles within ASEAN itself, while at the same time respecting the principle of non-interference.
Yeah, so I think, as I alluded to earlier, I think they can continue leveraging on the quiet diplomacy method, but through private dialogue and also consensus building. But I think one of the issues that they need to recognize is that diplomacy has its limitations, particularly when you're addressing critical issues such as human rights issues and also governance issues. So I think a more concrete signaling from ASEAN, I think, is something that Malaysia can bring with their chairmanship, just a clear, firm positioning, even if it's communicated in sort of calibrated way. I think it could demonstrate the position that ASEAN has on good governance. Another way, I think, is to use our economic positioning as an incentive to sort of influence the behavior of like the ASEAN member states, so that they're just not relying completely on, for example, behind-the-scenes engagements, but also using these economic incentives to sort of motivate the ASEAN member states to take up reforms in governance. I think it would be a powerful incentive for the ASEAN member states to commit to the governance reforms if we were to use this strategy instead. For example, tying the governance improvements on economic incentives, for example, favorable trade terms, increasing the ease of doing business, which will result in an improvement of foreign direct investment and also the economic climate as a whole. So I think this is something that Malaysia can position itself as it goes forward into the chairmanship. And also I think globally what we see is a threat to multilateralism, in a sense. So I think these weakening institutions, for example, with the WTO, we can see sort of has a risk on ASEAN's positioning. So I think there's importance for Malaysia to sort of make sure that they are firm with their positions, so the ASEAN relevance continues, which will bring a lot of good for the region itself.
Now, you just mentioned some of the challenges that potentially could be faced by Malaysia as being the host for the chairmanship next year. And our agenda, our key priorities and our strategy moving forward, is it going to affect, first and foremost, our goal and our principles and probably our key strategies that we have already set in line in moving forward?
Yeah, I think looking at the sort of initiatives that ASEAN has been bringing into the 2025 and also Malaysia's sort of economic priorities, In a sense, they do align. Most of them are on digitalization, climate, so they do have alignment in that sense. And also, I think it's a very good timing as well, because going into 2025, there's good economic growth. I think it's about 4.6% that's projected. So there's a lot of opportunities to link sort of economic incentives to governance reforms. And there's a lot of momentum to push for structural reforms. And I think this will sort of make countries more likely to commit to these changes. And I think with COVID, we saw a lot of countries shifting their priorities.
That's right.
Because there was a roadblock. So I think now that we're going into 2025, there's a lot more incentive for them to stick to these structural reforms. I think maybe with the DEFA, especially the Digital Economic Framework Agreement, I think that is something that Malaysia can really champion when going into it, making sure that the implementation is effective. Also, I think like this will really help to streamline the region-wide digital trade standards, which can improve, e-commerce growth, which has been booming in the region. And then it can improve market access, and also for SMEs as well, which is an important segment of ASEAN. I think about 99% of them are SMEs. So I think going into 2025, Malaysia does have a lot of key priorities that they can really push for that will also create long-term reforms as well for the region.
And I'd be excited because of the appreciation of the ringgit moving forward, right? So you just highlighted the challenges. Now let's talk about the opportunities that Malaysia might face in pushing for reforms and progressive agenda, so on and so forth, within the ASEAN framework itself. Because you mentioned internationally, but let's focus back as well on ASEAN first, because we can be literally a strong country, not just within the region, but together with ASEAN, right? Now, given as well the diverse political and economic system of member states, so how's it going to work? How are we going to champion our key priorities first and foremost?
Yeah, I think definitely, because we have diversity in terms of economic, politics, culture. There's so much diversity, and I think that's why the reason why ASEAN has always been sort of tipping their toe around putting forward reforms, also taking a stand. So I think maybe that needs to be modernized a bit, and I think also. Another issue could be also in terms of labour mobility. I think Malaysia as a net receiver of labour, I think definitely they can advocate for better regulatory reform around migrant workers, and also sort of push for more formal and protective mechanisms for labour rights in the region. I think that's something that Malaysia can do, given that they are a net receiver of labour as well.
Right.
So I think these are the things that sort of align with Malaysia's priorities as well, and also within the region as well. And yeah, because of the differences in disparities, I think if you look at digitalization, for example, I think we are pushing for streamlining of standards, but there's also certain, like for example, with the CLM countries, technological adoption might be lower. So also sort of having a more holistic picture of how to improve technology all across the region as well, not just focusing on like bigger reforms for the countries that are much more developed as well within the region.
It's a more inclusive thing altogether. It's not just a particular country, strengthening itself and just get the support from member states and to just move forward in that sense. Now, how can Malaysia balance first and foremost its national interests with the collective interests of ASEAN during its chairmanship?
Yeah, so I think if you're going back to the geopolitical tension part of it, I think Malaysia definitely will have a role in reinforcing ASEAN's sort of collective strategy, because we do have a vested interest in the South China Sea dispute that's been going on.
Correct.
I think I recently read that Malaysia has continued to sort of increase their oil and gas exploration despite China's sort of, I would say, warning. So I think Malaysia is taking a very, I think, strong stance in that sense. So I think that can sort of trickle over to the region as well, where rather than each country having their own perspective, it could be a regional united front against a much more bigger external force. I think that will give us a lot more bargaining power as well. So I think in those cases, I think sort of increasing partnership, and I think Malaysia has a very good diplomatic stance, very good diplomatic capabilities. So I think using that in order to sort of create a united front, I think will be a good way looking at it.
So you just mentioned like one strategy that could probably be in place, right? But do you think that there are any other strategies out there, that Malaysia can employ to build consensus and also drive collaborative initiatives, perhaps?
Yeah, I think another way would be to hinge it to sort of international standards as well. So I think, for example, with this geopolitical dispute, sort of making championing adherence to international standards, like for example the UN Convention on the law of seas. I think that could be something that provides a very clear signalling of our position. And I think also another thing is there has been some movement towards like a review of the ASEAN 5-point consensus.
Right.
So I think if Malaysia were to push for more humanitarian response, I think especially with Myanmar, I think this would be a very good opportunity for them to sort of balance the standards and also bring in new updates to sort of improve our positioning in that sense.
Now, you just mentioned about geopolitical tension, right? Let's talk about that because we cannot deny that very fact, right? So, yes, geopolitical tensions in the region, we cannot deny it, cannot put that aside and sweep it under the rug. So, what role can Malaysia play in strengthening ASEAN's strategic autonomy and centrality in regional affairs?
Yeah, I think aside from these, adopting these standards and also harmonizing these standards, I think another way of looking at it is also being an economic powerhouse. That would definitely give us a lot more bargaining power in terms of in the region as ASEAN itself. I think there are a few countries within the region that are performing really well. So there are pockets of that. But I think building a more united front is what is important. So I think maybe in terms of trade as well, I think ASEAN has done a lot in terms of reducing tariff through the Article agreement. But I think non-tariff barriers are still quite high. So that's something that Malaysia can look at. How do we harmonize regulations, improve the mutual recognition of standards. So I think also there's another part of it, which is the authorized economic operator, the AEO, which is something that I think was accepted by about 10 member states, but only a few have adopted it. So I think these kinds of small initiatives that could really help improve regulatory adherence in the region itself can really help improve access to market access and also improve trade within the sector, within the region itself. So I think something like this would definitely help improve us as a collective region to be an economic powerhouse as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are some of the stuff that, of course, when you mentioned. But we're going to talk about economic priorities, so on and so forth. We're going to dive deeper into Malaysia's chairmanship next year. But before that, definitely lots to discuss. But we're going to be going for a quick break, and we'll be back right after this. And welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. We have our guests in the studio right now, and we've been talking about economic priorities in Malaysia that Malaysia should actually address to enhance ASEAN's economic integration. So let's talk about its integration as well. Let's talk about its competitiveness and resilience during next year, which is our big year.
Yeah, so I think aside from trade, I think, which I already covered earlier, I think also another thing that has been a priority for the region for selected countries is the climate and energy transition. I think that is also something that Malaysia can push for in the coming year.
Yeah.
I think that's about like 250 billion that needs to be invested in energy infrastructure itself. So I think prioritizing these energy connectivity plans will be something that we can look forward to next year, especially with the ASEAN Power Grid initiative that's going on. I think currently about 9 out of 18 are being implemented. So I think making sure that the implementation is in place, I think it's something that Malaysia can definitely push for. Another part of it, I think, will also be, there's also an initiative called the ASEAN Smart City Network. So I think bringing that up back again to ensure that we have sustainable urban planning, I think that would be really helpful in terms of ensuring that the connectivity within the AMS countries as well. Yeah.
So those are some of it. And this is the most, I would say, highlighting this question, this is very important, right? Because we're talking about institutional reforms. Now, this could be a make or break. And truth be told, not many would accept reforms, but obviously accepting reforms is so that we can make sure we can strengthen whatever that we're trying to approve and whatever we're trying to approach in that sense. So institutional reforms or changes might be definitely necessary to improve ASEAN's decision-making processes. So let's talk about its problem as well and its capabilities, problem-solving capabilities during Malaysia's chairmanship next year.
Yeah, I think but also need to give credit where it's due. I think ASEAN has done a lot in terms of reforming institutional reforms and changes. A lot of initiatives in place, a lot of mutual agreements that happens within the region as well. But I think another issue or challenge I think would be in terms of assessing those impact.
Right.
Because of the disparity within ASEAN member states.
That's right. You just mentioned just.
Yeah, because of the huge disparity. Sometimes adopting these standards or reforms requires a lot more cost, a lot more resources, also digital capabilities, which certain countries wouldn't have. And in a sense, from that, assessing the impact of these regulatory reforms are also difficult because they are not able to provide the data and data is unavailable. So these sort of trickles down and creates an issue as well. So I think making sure that there is a proper impact assessment mechanism, I think is very important to ensure that these reforms are actually in place. Because I think within the region as well, it's an issue where there are a lot of policies that come out, a lot of initiatives that come out, but the implementation of it is key, and also identifying whether there were effects from it, I think is also very important. And also I think maybe in terms of like the geopolitical or the political issues that are happening within the region, I think most of the negotiations usually stall because of the majority voting, because of the voting system where it's consensus building.
Right.
So I think maybe introducing a more qualified majority voting for countries that have interest in this issue should, I think, would help sort of open up the process that has been stalling for so many years. Yeah, so I think maybe introducing that reform in that sense in the voting process of countries in these issues, I think, would be helpful.
What about its problem-solving capabilities? Is there anything else that Malaysia can do better, or not just Malaysia as a whole, but probably the other member states as well? Yeah, I think in terms of problem-solving capabilities, I think. Because you mentioned, like, yeah, first and foremost, when it comes to their infrastructure, it wouldn't be probably as good as Malaysia or so on and so forth, right? Would this compromise the whole agenda?
I don't think it compromised the whole agenda per se, because I think even the lesser developed countries are also working towards the same goal. I think maybe the development stage will be slightly different because of the way how the implementation will take place. But at least having those initiatives in place would at least make sure that in the long term they will be able to catch up as well. So I don't think it will be a complete hindrance to the agenda. But making sure that everyone's on the same page, I think, is very important. And yeah, so I think that itself is very important. And also, I think maybe another point of view to take is that ASEAN as an institution, there has been sort of thoughts of the need to be more modern as well in the way that they conduct the functioning of the organization operations. So I think maybe that also could help a bit more of a modernization of the way that things are done, rather than being a lot more bureaucratic and hierarchical. So I think maybe that's because of the size of the organization itself, but I think with times moving ahead, I think there has to be some modernization in the way that things are being done. Nice,
sure. Now, how can Malaysia even engage in civil society, the private sector or other stakeholders to actually ensure that the ASEAN agenda is responsive to the needs and the aspirations of the people?
Yeah, I think going into the Malaysian Chairmanship, what I have noticed being from a civil society organization is that there has been increased engagement. So I think that's a good step. But I think what is needed is a bit more of a feedback mechanism, I think.
Feedback mechanism,
yeah,
right.
Feedback mechanism and also a feedback loop, I think, in a sense that because a lot of initiatives are introduced, it is discussed, point of views are shared, but what is being adopted is not something that we know eventually. So I think that feedback mechanism, a feedback loop would be very useful. And I also think in another sense, the socialization of policies. So I think the policies do come out, but sometimes people are not aware of it, and even CSOs are not aware of it. So I think a very good mechanism to socialize these policies are important to ensure that because we are also able to mobilize our own thoughts to the community as well. So having that sort of balancing, I think, is very important.
But socializing this policy is always a challenge. Now, we managed to actually speak to our guests last week or that particular time when our guest came into the studio, is that we are trying to create an inclusive agenda right here, but not many would actually know, not especially when it comes to the private sector. So it's very difficult right there. Maybe you could actually tell us, probably your aspirations, how can we actually champion these policies so that everybody else out there would actually know?
No, I think that's why I think CSOs are very important, because CSOs are sort of the intermediaries between where we are able to share our research or our findings with the private sector and also with government. So having CSOs as a sort of mobilizing group could be very useful for ASEAN itself, because if they were to introduce policies and if we are aware of the policies, we are able to inform them to private sector and have that connection. So having that, I think, is very important, and also having the feedback loop that allows us also to feedback if certain issues are not satisfying the private sector sentiment. So I think that is very important, having that conversation. Yeah.
Actually, how important is important, right, for the private sector to be with us, in moving forward? Because I think if they don't know some policies being implemented, then they definitely lose out on all, I would say.
Yeah, like even with the trade issues, like for example with the authorized economic operators and also the trade standards, I think sometimes private businesses are not aware of this because it's very technical, and also when it's introduced, it's also very technical as well. So I think this socialization is very important so that businesses are able to also take advantage of the policies that are being introduced and improve their business, which is what eventually the region wants as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could actually tell us, probably at the back of your head, one of the policies maybe implemented this year that not many, that the private sectors didn't actually engage in that particular policies. Would there be any examples that you could actually share with us? Maybe perhaps on like manpower or digital infrastructure. Are there any? Perhaps that you could see. Maybe you would think that it is, but maybe it's probably actually not. But you would hope that they would actually take the opportunity to leverage on this.
Yeah, I think that there has been a lot more use of labour as well. I think there's a lot of mutual agreements that has been signed and adopted by countries that maybe businesses are not aware of, and also in terms of employment. Right. So I think those kind of things are definitely something that businesses should be aware of, because it does affect manpower, it does affect the resources. So I think it's something that they should take into account.
Nice. Okay, now moving forward, obviously we have this chairmanship that is happening next year, and we want to talk about this long-term vision and how it can benefit not just the country, but the ASEAN member states as well. And let's also talk about the strategy. Should Malaysia advocate for the strengthening of ASEAN's role as a leading regional organisation in Asia Pacific?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think Malaysia is very well positioned to sort of advocate for this. I think a lot of other issues that I've mentioned earlier, for example, with infrastructure, I think will be very key in sort of reducing the disparity between the regions as well, and increasing the connectivity. Because I think what is needed is improve trade within the region as well, rather than just each country having different bilateral agreements with external countries. But within the region, I think strengthening the ease of doing business within the region, I think, is very important. So I think that is something that Malaysia can definitely push for, and also sort of developing a regional value chain. I think it will be very important in key sectors, like for example with Myanmar, with Cambodia in agriculture. I think using their competitive advantages and sort of improving the regional supply chain, I think is something that Malaysia can go forward. And I think it's in line with our domestic policies as well in strengthening supply chains. So I think, or also, for example, creating special economic zones which are in certain places, but sort of making it wider towards all ASEAN countries within the region. So I think that will be very useful to strengthen our position as an economic hub here. Yeah, and that will improve our bargaining power as well.
Bargaining power. Let's talk about bargaining power. What's with bargaining power here as we look forward? I mean, is there anything that probably perhaps next year ASEAN Chairmanship in Malaysia, we could actually address some of these challenges and stuff like that when you mentioned bargaining power? Are we talking about trade? Are we talking about the easy access of skilled workers to join us here in Malaysia, and us Malaysians going there to actually earn a decent living income? What could it be?
Yeah, I think definitely trade would be one of the top priorities. I think improving trade bilaterally is something that each country has been doing.
Yeah.
But as a region, I think having that sort of single region trading with Asean, I think would definitely be an important thing to look forward to next year. And I think definitely in terms of ease of mobility, I think even within the region currently there has a lot of challenges in terms of ease of mobility. So I think that's something that we need to fix regionally first before we even look into the other countries, which each country has been doing. But I think as a region itself, if we were to do it and remove those challenges, it would be better for the region. And I think another thing that's important is the AEC blueprint. It's sort of expiring in 2025, so that will be something that comes into play next year. So I think with Malaysia sort of starting the next 10-year or 5-year journey, I think there will be a lot of opportunities to put in long-term reforms that I think would be helpful for the region.
If there's one thing that you can share with our viewers who are watching at home, something to actually take away, something to actually look out for with Malaysia's role as the host for the ASEAN next year, what would you share to them?
Okay, so I think maybe what I would say is that I think ASEAN has always been looking for sort of a leader for the region, which I think it was in place maybe 20 years ago with the previous sort of leaders that were in place, political leaders in place.
Yeah.
So I think the Prime Minister definitely has a chance to be sort of a voice for the region because he has had a lot of international engagements and has been putting himself out there. So I think in that sense, I think Malaysia will be very well positioned to show itself as a leader of the region, and this can carry forward in the future as well. So I think that's something that the people can look forward to.
Right. Okay, you know what? That's all the time we've got for today on the table. Thank you so much for actually being here with us and for actually talking to us about ASEAN's chairmanship and its role, so on and so forth, and what actually we can actually move forward and what we can actually look out for. Now, we've been talking to Shamila Suntarusegarun, Assistant Manager under the Economics and Business Unit at the Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, or IDEAS. So now, a repeat of this episode or broadcast can be viewed again at the same time tomorrow and subsequent days on both RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel, which is also live streaming on YouTube. Till next Thursday, where we'll discuss on another topic of interest. Till then, I'm Brenda Paul signing off. Take care and good night.